Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the sophomore album from Alessia Cara called The Pains of Growing. I can't help but find it a little bit strange that going into this review, I was rooting for Alessia Cara. And let's make this very clear, I've been at least trying to be on her side since 2015 and the influx of Lorde wannabes in which she came up. I certainly prefer her to Halsey or Dea, that's for damn sure. But Alessia Cara's success has kind of frustrated me, because as much as I really liked her breakthrough single Here and her follow-up Wild Things, I had the sinking feeling that given the success of Scars to Your Beautiful and her feature on Logic's Suicide Hotline song, that would be the direction that Def Jam would shove her in. And yes, she had won the Grammy for Best New Artist off of those singles, but that award can be the kiss of death for a lot of new acts, and poor management has destroyed more promising pop artists than bad albums have. And I can't stress how much I didn't want that to happen, because I've always been convinced that Alessia Cara was a more interesting and more vibrant personality and songwriter than just churning out self-esteem anthem pablum. And given how Rush Know It All had felt, I had to hope that her follow-up this year would show a little bit more refinement, especially as her competition had gotten stiffer with Lorde's resurgence with Melodrama last year and the striking rise of Billie Eilish. Yeah, I would still prefer to listen to Alessia Cara than Camila Cabello or Halsey or especially Bibi Rexha, but this project really had to stick the landing. And by all accounts, it could. Alessia Cara had taken a much bigger writing and production role with their sophomore album with no guest stars whatsoever, and major labels don't tend to offer that level of freedom unless they've got faith in the release, or are looking to cut their losses by keeping the team and budget as small as possible, not helped by this being dumped near December. And I didn't think it was the latter case here. Know It All had moved a lot of units on the back of Alessia Cara's writing, but I was admittedly cautious about the pains of growing, so what did we get with this? So this was a bit of a weird listen. The sort of album that whenever I think I don't have much to say about it, something new seems to slide into the picture. But whenever it seems like that there's more going on, it doesn't quite showcase as much depth as I was really hoping for. The easiest way to describe this album would be that it's transitional, but what feels more accurate is that Alessia Cara made an album that would have been right at home in the organic-leaning adult alternative acts of the mid to late 2000s. Lyrics that aim for a little bit more nuance, but still feel very much approachable with a pop focus, a vocal timbre that's not quite as polished as pop but fits the content, even with some of the flourishes of retro jazz and soul that was popular among that time. It sure as hell doesn't fit with the rest of the mainstream pop scene right now with all the trap embellishments, and it definitely places Alessia Cara in her own lane stylistically, but at the same time, as someone who is familiar with that particular genre, I can also tell Alessia Cara's got a ways to go before she really sticks the landing for me and delivers a great album. This is good, but it should be better. And a big part of this is how The Pains of Growing feels split between that classier, more tasteful adult alternative lane and mainstream pop. And I think we really have to start with Alessia Cara herself. And look, it's impossible to ignore that with her huskier tone, she's never really had the intensity and fine control and subtlety of a Lorde or a Billie Eilish, and that's before you factor in a delivery that can feel very youthful and exuberant. She's got organic charisma, and she doesn't really need to rely on synthetic vocal embellishments or a lot of autotune, that's for sure. But I also put part of her bass appeal is that delivery balanced out with writing that aimed to bring a little bit more detail and flair between the lines. That's why Here worked so well. And given that balance is often best achieved with slightly more organic production or a little bit more soulful, a little older, a little more tasteful, we run into where this project can feel the most immediately compromised. And yes, I know at least part of this is intentional. This is an album thematically about being in transition towards more of an adulthood role and finding one's footing and comfort with their emotions, but while I would argue the production as a whole is a bit more consistent, it can still feel kind of colorless and more scattered than it should, especially given that there are tones and timbres that she approached coming off of Know It All that are refined here and sound a hell of a lot better and deserve more emphasis. And you can be forgiven for not noticing it immediately, mostly because the songs all feel kinda short and at some point start to run together, but when it first started to really click for me was mostly acoustic Wherever I Live. It's bare bones, and while the vocal punch-ins are a little bit too obvious, indicative of a production that could have easily used one more draft just to polish things up, but the level of mundane detail in the lyrics kind of fits for the smaller scope. I like the song. Hell, with more of the warmer tones around a little more, it almost could feel like an indie pop cut or a demo from Colby Calais in the late 2000s. And if you're paying attention to the melodies, the influences, they really do shine through. The main piano line behind Out of Love, it's definitely throwing some sidelong glances at Dog Days Are Over, for example. And then there's Comfortable, where Alessia Cara is doubling down on her Amy Winehouse worship, and while she's got nowhere close to the edge in her delivery to really nail it, but with the spiky electric guitar and more developed bass line and horns, she's definitely in the right territory. Of course, it helps that it's produced by No ID, but again, she's on the right path here. But here's the problem. Even if her writing is aiming a little bit higher than your standard mainstream pop, it's still from a younger vantage point, and her delivery doesn't quite have the depths of soul or fiery presence that she needs just yet to pull this off. So I do get why for about half the album she goes more for pop than adult alternative or soul. And the problem is that the pop is just nowhere near as interesting or consistent. And a huge part of this is production. As I said, it's not quite as distracting as before because it doesn't feel as rushed or slapdash, but the percussion is still way too heavy and it drives good melodies more to the background. At its worst, it's hard to ignore the blocky scratch of the bass on Trust My Lonely is swamping out the entire mix, or how despite having some live drums, they still dropped a lumpy beat onto Girl Next Door that could have easily just relied on its guitar arrangement. It didn't need that added beat. But take a song like All We Know, which could have sounded just fine if that guitar lead wasn't pressed into blurry mush. And that's before you get songs like My Kind with its watery desaturation and ascending backing vocals, or the groaning tones behind Easier Said, or the bassy click that I wish let a little bit more of that soulful arranged melody coming through on Not Today. Hell, even through 7 Days, it's chasing this glassy set of tones. There are some welcome guitar snarled elements that I'd sure as hell prefer over a mix oversaturated in the bass line. Same thing with Nintendo Game and its half-hearted stabs at chiptune. And that's before I talk about the vocal layering, which really could have used a second look on a fair few songs. And again, I'm circling back to the thought that the production seems to actively suck away melodic tones that could be more colorful and interesting for Alessia Cara in order to serve a desaturated sound that just doesn't give her much to work with. And while I'm placing the majority of the blame with Pop and Oak and Ricky Reid, who have inflicted this exact same type of production on a lot of mainstream pop artists, and they should stop that, it's somehow even worse here because I don't see Alessia Cara staying in the lane for mainstream pop. And sure, I might personally get greedy and say I would love to hear a whole project co-produced by No ID, but from the few more minimal notes we do get from her, I think Alessia Cara's got a good enough ear where she could credibly produce this entire thing on her own, and I would be fine with that. Now, of course, for even as much as I am praising her, we do have to circle back to the writing and a very frank admission. Alessia Cara, she's at her best with detail, because without a lot of melody, the songs can get pretty boring and pretty flavorless without it. And not saying that they're bad songs, just that there's not a lot to them. Of course, when she has good tunes, like Uncomfortable and A Little More and Out of Love, she can do them justice. They're really damn good songs. But where her writing stands out the most are on songs like 7 Days. A little bit overstuffed as she calls out God for the chaos down here below, but there's something kind of wry and sardonic about highlighting how, according to Genesis, it only took him 7 days to make all this, and the relative rushed effort shows, especially as one of those days was just rest for him. And I like the benign, lonely hotel details on Wherever I Live, and the few video game references we get on the messy, toxic relationship described by Nintendo Game. I'm not quite sure they always connect on My Kind, but the thought is there, it's getting in the right direction. And thematically, I like that the album holds together a little stronger. Yeah, the breakup arc can feel a little overdone in mainstream pop, but the album is more about accepting the pain, the loneliness, and the lack of clear or easy answers that come with growing up. And I like the sentiments that show up across songs like Easier Said and Growing Pains. Not only that the uncertainty that comes with her digging into this territory and possibly overthinking all of her emotions, but how whatever this might be for her going through right now, it's gonna take time, and she needs to square with that. And more to the point, there's not really an obvious pop move on this album. There's no blatant self-esteem anthem. The love songs are a little wordier, they're trying to do a little more. And while I'd struggle to say that any of this is all that deep, it is going for different territory. It's going in the right direction. There's a lot of potential. And that's the big frustration with The Pains of Growing. Because when Alessia Cara is allowed to show off more flair and personality and not just make desaturated, percussion-heavy, generic pop, she really shines. Pure and simple. And there's a part of me that feels that she shouldn't be on a major label at all if you're not going to give her the production that suits her style of writing. But what's exasperating is that there is a major label market for the music that Alessia Cara is making and she's going to make going forward. Look at the success of Adele, who was around this age when she was putting out songs like Chasing Pavements, and there is a sustainable marketplace for this sort of literate adult alternative that I can see Alessia Cara making going forward, and a lot more longevity than the majority of mainstream pop. Now, the issue I'm seeing is that she's going in that direction pretty much on her own, and she is still pretty young. And I'm not seeing Def Jam provide the right kind of label support given by the release date for this album, which is why The Pains of Growing just isn't as good as it should be. Now, for me, it's a very strong 6 out of 10 and a recommendation, but again, I think Alessia Cara's potential, it needs to be better directed. Get No ID behind her, please. You know, I'm still supporting her, but man, should be better than it is. But if you're curious to watch her in transition, it's still good. Check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I'm a little bit surprised I had this much to say about this album, but again, I see a lot of potential, and I want to see this get corrected before she goes askew, and hopefully that she doesn't get dropped, because I think there is potential for how this album can be marketed and pushed. But if you want to buy or stream the album, links down there below, and I got the poll up there. I'm curious where you guys are going to fall on this, especially the Alessia Cara fans, who are probably not going to take well to me telling them that she should go out of pop. Beyond that, if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process or help support the channel, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, guys get to add albums, movies, or even top 10 lists to that schedule. More details right over there. If you want to see my schedule, it's on my Instagram, link down there below. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.